You are now listening to Talk Your Jits podcast.
Hello and welcome to Talk Your Jits podcast. This podcast is, as the name implies, all about jiu-jitsu. I'm your host, Lamar Smith, and today's guest is a blue belt who trains at American Top Team Coconut Creek, located in Coconut Creek, California. Ladies and gentlemen, Joseph McFarlane.
Hey, thank you so much for the intro. Lamar, that's Coconut Creek, South Florida.
Oh, excuse me. Coconut Creek, South Florida. My apologies. My apologies.
I think when you hear coconuts, automatically you think of palm trees and Beverly Hills sea breeze.
Yeah.
But we actually have that down here too.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, my apologies. Not California. It's not California.
It's all right, man. Hey, thanks for having me on the show.
Man, I appreciate it, man. I appreciate you taking the time out to do this episode with me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'd love to talk about my journey, and I know it's all things jiu-jitsu, but quite honestly, it's been a multifaceted catalyst that has led me back into jiu-jitsu after all these years.
Oh, nice. Well, man, look, the floor is yours, man. Go ahead and take us down that road.
Awesome, man. So here's what I like to start off by saying this. My jiu-jitsu journey started over 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I just turned 40, just to give the listeners a little bit of context. Just had my 40th birthday.
Well, happy birthday.
And thank you. And when I was about 19,
mm-hmm.
I had just finished high school, and I was not sure which direction I was going to go in my life at the time. I was a standout wrestler in high school. I was ranked third in the state. And my grades weren't good enough to go to college, even though, I had been eyeballing several schools specific for their wrestling programs, but I just didn't have the grades.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up going to the Navy, and while I was in the Navy, I tried out for the United States Navy SEALs. Due to a turn of events, as it would seem, my eyesight was not good enough, and I ended up getting kicked out of the Navy completely for what the military calls erroneous entry and a medical discharge.
Oh, wow.
So that was kind of strange too. So my mom says is that, it's always God's plan, and it probably just wasn't his plan for me to go that direction.
Mm-hmm.
When I came home from the Navy, again, I was kind of there, not knowing what I was going to do with my life, being 19, 20 years old at the time. But I was a tough wrestler. And once again, my grades weren't good enough to get into school. But a local tough guy actually recruited me to his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu club, which at the time, this is 20 years ago, was at a local gym.
Mm-hmm.
And so I walked in with my head up and my chest out, and I was proud and I was cocky and arrogant, like most 19, 20-year-olds. And, wrestlers, right?
Right.
And I went in there and I did pretty well, considering that I had never known anything about jiu-jitsu other than what I had seen on the earliest UFCs when Royce Gracie was fighting.
Uh-huh.
But once the fight went to the ground, I was quickly subdued in a world of different submissions. Now, quite honestly, back then, and 20 years ago, the jiu-jitsu game was limited in terms of how many different moves there were.
Yeah.
So it was a triangle choke or a Kimura lock, or an arm bar. Usually was usually the move that I fell victim to. And very quickly I realized, wow, I'm not so tough, at least not as tough as I thought I was. And as a result, I said, I have to learn this craft. I must.
Mm-hmm.
It was an injury to my ego, because up until that moment, I was ranked third in the state. Up until that moment, I wanted to be a Navy SEAL. Up until that moment, I couldn't last a minute and 30 seconds without being choked out.
Right.
Right. And so that was the very beginning of my jiu-jitsu journey. I had just got back from the military, wasn't sure which direction I was going, got recruited to a local jiu-jitsu club in upstate New York. And man, let me tell you, it's so much has happened since then over the course of 20 years, which probably has you wondering why I'm only a blue belt.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question.
Yeah. So, what I'll say is this, because I will allude to it because there's still more chronologically to the story that I'd like to share with you.
Uh-huh.
But just to kind of give you some foresight into the story, what I ended up doing was I ended up hanging up the sport altogether, completely quitting to never, ever return back. And that period lasted for approximately 15 years.
Oh, wow.
And that time frame of 15 years gets interrupted by something that happened in my life approximately 1 year ago.
Okay.
And as you know, I'm back today.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
So I've given you some background. I've given you some foresight as to where we're going. I think maybe the next best thing to do is pick it up where I left off and tell the middle of the story.
Do your thing.
All right, cool. So I joined the jiu-jitsu club in upstate New York, and I was young, 19, 20 years old. And I'm going through the process and the motions, and I was a very fast learner. I was a very good athlete, faster and stronger than most people. I was in a smaller weight class. Back then, I believe it was 140 pounds. So just lightning quick and just full of piss and vinegar, is what people would say, right? And, it wasn't before long that I started dominating a lot of guys in the room. And my coach, who was a real hard ass, encouraged me to start getting into competition. Now, back then, competitions were sketch.
Yeah.
Super sketch. The back then, the most legitimate competitions were Naga, which is still around today.
Mm-hmm.
And the only other really legit competitions back then, I'm thinking a ways back now. I'm trying to draw from memory here. But I believe they had like Grappler's Quest, Abu Dhabi was obviously legit. And they had like Mundials, which were in Brazil. But other than that, man, the competitions that were just around were super sketch. Tournaments thrown together, held in people's basements, backyards, high school gymnasiums. Local clubs would come together, and they'd have like a mock weigh-in, total like underground type stuff. No real law of the jungle.
Just straight
right?
Fight Club.
Straight Fight Club. I mean, you weren't allowed to punch and kick and stuff like that. It was submission, right? But I remember back in the old days, and depending on your audience, they may remember this too. But people would enter the submission tournament dressed like the early UFCs. Some people would wear wrestling shoes. Some people were barefoot. Some people would wear board shorts. Some people wore the little, tight, spandex like fight shorts. We called them Vale Tudo.
Yeah, the Vale Tudo shorts. Yeah.
Yeah, Vale Tudo shorts. Some people wore. Nobody wore rash guards back then. Like they didn't even exist yet. The only people that wore rash guards were surfers, right, on the beach. Nobody wore rash guards back then. It was either bare chested or your favorite gym T-shirt, which by the way ended up getting ripped in half.
Mm-hmm.
Because even if you competed no gi, back then in those days under the sketch rules, if somebody wore an article of clothing, even if it was no gi, you were allowed to use it against them.
Really?
Back in the old school days. So I'm on record. I mean, I don't know if it's still on the internet, if you can pull it up or anything, because it's been almost 20 years now, but I'm definitely on record of having multiple T-shirt choke championships at Nogi Naga tournaments multiple times.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So guys would wear the T-shirt in a no-gi competition, thinking that it was going to help them because it absorbs sweat. But I would go for literally a T-shirt choke in a no-gi tournament at a Naga competition. Back then, 100% allowed, totally legal. So it's funny, man, because I remember back in those days, telling my parents what it was that I was doing, and they were so against it. They thought that what I was involved in was some type of like underground kumite type stuff, right? Kumite type stuff, where no holds barred. Which, by the way, that term was also used back in the day too.
Yeah, Valley Tudo was no holds barred. Yep.
Vale Tudo, no holds barred. Eventually, they called what they now call MMA. They called full contact fighting, and eventually evolved into MMA. That's like the more, I guess, marketable term, right? So I did that for years. I excelled very quickly. I entered tournaments. I won multiple tournaments. And a lot of it had to do with my athleticism. A lot of it had to do with my very strong wrestling background. And I don't want to give the listeners the wrong impression when I say this, but back in the day, I used to enter into expert, advanced divisions, black belt divisions. And, I would compete. I would do well. I would end up in the finals. I never won a tournament in the black belt division, but I did end up in the finals in the black belt division as a white belt, and against a legitimate Renzo Gracie black belt. I won't say his name out of respect, but I did get beaten by that person. And I remember that the overall consensus from my coaches, from my team, and then from the tournament promoters were that that I was really something special, and that I should continue pursuing this possibly as a career.
Definitely.
Yeah. So right around, I don't know. I think I must have been around. I got to do the math, but I think right around 20 or 21 years old, I started fighting MMA. So again, back then, Naga in the Northeast was and still is a very prominent mid-level and maybe even some cases top tier level combat organization. So they not only did they have jiu-jitsu tournaments, but they also had MMA tournaments or MMA cards. So I started fighting MMA, started actively training to do that. I had some very good success in that. And I diligently pursued a career as a professional fighter in MMA. And probably the biggest event that I had was in 2003, Reality Fighting 5, Atlantic City, New Jersey, Boardwalk Hall, title fight against the then champion. I was the challenger, and I will say his name, and I have much respect for him. His name is Nick Catone, if anybody wants to look it up.
Okay.
Nick Catone. So Nick and he was the champion. I was the challenger. We fought to a draw. And right around that same time, I met Ken Shamrock. And right around that same time, I was 21 years old, and I decided that I wanted to move to Florida to train with American Top Team.
Okay.
So boarded a plane, got off, landed in Fort Lauderdale in February. It was 75 degrees out. Saw beautiful palm trees, saw red Ferraris, and I saw pretty Latino women. And I said, wow, I arrived at 21 years old.
Say,
And
I
so
am here.
I'm here. Exactly. And so I was very fortunate. I had a family member, a cousin of mine, that let me stay with him for free until I got my feet, on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
I sought out the gym, found the gym. Back then, 20 years ago, they were founded in, well, they have much earlier beginnings, not in Coconut Creek. The earliest beginnings were actually in Miami. Then they went to Boca. Then they ended up in Coconut Creek, where they are today. But when I arrived there, they were already in Coconut Creek. And went to the gym, walked in. I had no idea who I was looking for or talking to. This is back in the day before we had iPhones. Everybody had flip phones, Motorola Razors and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, you would, look up where you were going on the internet, and then you'd write the address down, and you'd print out the directions, and you'd look at the directions as you drove in your car to find the place.
Good old MapQuest.
Exactly. Right. That's what it was. And so I found the place. I walked in, and it's funny because I walked in and I felt like I arrived at like a super Walmart, because to me, this gym was so big and so impressive and so clean and so just impressive. I felt like I arrived to the big leagues, right?
Mm-hmm.
And which is funny because fast forward to today, the gym is like 100 times the size today, the new location, right? So it's
Wow.
like way even bigger now. So I walked in. I didn't know who to ask for. I didn't know who was what. Just a young 21-year-old kid who was real tough, and I wanted to be the best. And when I walked in, I didn't know. I had no idea. But the first two people who I saw when I walked in were two very tough-looking, older, and to me older. I was 21. Older-looking Brazilian dudes, and I had no idea who they were. But who they were was Ricardo Laborio and Marcelo Silveira, or Marcelo Silveira, and of the Silveira brothers. And you might know Marcelo from his big brother Conan Silveira.
Mm-hmm. I heard the name before.
Who fought in the UFC.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't know who those guys were, but I could immediately tell that they were somebody. They were, like I said, they were big, strong looking guys, tattoos, and cauliflower ear, Brazilian. And I said, I introduced myself, and I said, I'm a fighter from New York. I just moved to Florida. I'm a pro, and I'm here because I want to train with the best. And Marcelo Silveira told me this, and I'm paraphrasing. He said in his Brazilian accent, he said, I like your ambition. I like that you're here to learn how to fight. But I want you to know that nobody just walks into the gym and just says, hi, I'm here to fight. If you want to be one of us, then you have to come in and you have to train like one of us. You have to give your everything like you're one of us, and you have to bleed like you're one of us. And so if you're willing to do that, then we're willing to have you here. Are you willing to do that? And of course, being the young, ambitious, bright-eyed, and bushy-tailed 21-year-old aspiring professional athlete, I said, yes, sir, I am. And then he said, okay, well, go ahead, go suit up. And Brazilians call sparring, they have a Portuguese word for sparring. They call it bloqueio, which I don't know what the exact translation is, but I believe it's just translated as sparring. Okay, so they call bloqueio. Now, of course, I don't speak Portuguese. I'm from America. I'm American from New York. And he said, okay, get ready because we're going to do bloqueo. Of course, I don't know what that means. But, usually where I'm from, when you walk into a gym, you kind of already know what days are sparring days and what days are not. So my very first day of walking into the gym, he was like, get your helmet on. Right?
Oh no.
Get your helmet on. So you're brand new, you don't even know where the locker room is. Right. So
right.
You kind of just walk in, and back in those days, it's completely changed now. It's completely integrated, and everyone's really cool. But back in those days, I remember it being very segregated. And what I mean by that is, there were really two groups of people in that gym, the Brazilians and then the people who were not Brazilian.
Right.
Right. So the Brazilians kind of stuck together, and they were very cool and they were very friendly and very nice, but there was a language barrier for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Right. A lot of these guys had just come here from Brazil and they were still learning English. And then there were a bunch of other dudes who were not Brazilian, like me, who don't speak a lick of Portuguese, but they're there to train. So everyone was cool, but I definitely recognize that, the white guys would hang out over here and the Brazilians kind of hang out over there. And then that's just kind of how it was, right? So we go in there, I put the headgear on. Most of the practice is in Portuguese. That was new to me. That was strange. It's funny because back then we had Google, but it wasn't like the Google how everyone has it today.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Where you can type anything into your computer or your phone and you can find images, information, within a quarter of a second. Right. So I get paired up with a couple of Brazilian dudes who are about my size, 145 pounds, in that area. I don't know who they are. Quite frankly, didn't care. I was, again, piss and vinegar, 21 years old. I had just fought in Atlantic City against the champ. And as far as I was concerned, these guys should be worried about me. Right.
Right.
I'm the one who came down from New York, tough town, New York, to, palm trees, Coconut, Florida.
Right. Coconut, Florida.
They should be worried about me, which is a good thing because, man, I went into those sparring rounds, with some big balls because what happened next came at another surprise to me. So, again, I didn't know who I was sparring with. I had, just general respect for the person who I was sparring with, tap the gloves, nod your head, right?
Mm-hmm.
Laborio says, okay, guys, make sure you keep it at about, 50 or 60%. And, okay, 50%, I know what that feels like. That's cool. So we touch gloves and I'm sparring with the person in front of me. And I quickly realized that this person's 50% didn't feel like 50%. Now, it wasn't 100%. I'll give him that. But I started feeling, the pressure. And I was like, wow, like this guy's he's throwing kind of hard. And as somebody who is primarily a wrestler, whenever I get in trouble, I usually lean back on my wrestling, right? Mm-hmm. So if something's not going right, I go for the takedown. And then I can control from there, what have you. So me and this person have some very heated exchanges, and I will use his name. I'll tell you who it is later. There was actually two guys, and we have some heated exchanges. And man, I remember throwing everything but the kitchen sink at him just to get him on the ground, and I couldn't get him on the ground. A couple times I got close to finishing the takedown, but I couldn't finish the takedown. And I remember feeling good about myself because while I was scrapping, Laborio looked over at me and kind of gave me, he kind of gave me some kudos, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you're a young kid, that feels good when the coach notices that you're going for it,
right?
And even though maybe he didn't get it, he's like, "Hey, good job, keep it up," that type of stuff, right?
Right.
So I finished the round with this guy, and his name was Edson Diniz, who I know he was a professional fighter. He was a black belt at the time. I don't remember if he fought in the UFC. I know he fought in some other big events, and I think he may have been a UFC fighter. So I didn't know who that was at the time. Okay, I just thought it was another tough Brazilian dude who I got paired up with that day. Well, later on that day, I'm sitting down and they're cycling guys in and out. I get paired up with another guy, and the coach says to us, hey, 50%, right? And I'm like, well, I know that because we had just got done doing that. But little did I know that he was actually telling the sparring partner, hey, be careful.
Oh, wow.
Right? So me and this guy, and I'll give you his name too in a second, but I want to tell what happened first.
Mm-hmm.
So me and this guy square off, exchange some jabs, a little bit of roundhouse kick, little patty cake, feeling each other out. He pops me. He pops me with a counter punch. And man, there was a lot of power behind that. It wasn't 100%, but it was good and clean. And he sat down on it. And I remember thinking to myself like, oh, okay. So I threw one back at him. Now he and I are starting to ratchet up the intensity. He threw a looping right hand haymaker for my head and missed. And by the way, I didn't slip it. I didn't duck it. He missed. And I'm lucky he missed. But when he missed, he kind of stumbled over. I wish if it's a podcast, so I'm doing my best to explain what it looks like. But imagine somebody throwing a wild right looping hand over the top and missing. And as they miss, their shoulder and their head kind of goes down and forward.
Mm-hmm.
And what was their rear leg is now their front leg because they swung so hard they went forward.
Yeah, he tried to put some oomph into that punch.
Yeah, and it was sloppy, but it was haymaker. Well, my training told me to chamber and roundhouse, and that's what I did. So I did like the way my hips were. I switch hip and chambered a roundhouse, and I kicked him right in his face. And when I did that, all of the white boys on the bleachers were like, "Oh." Like that, right? They all made that noise. And he was wearing a helmet and my shin landed right on his, right in his mouth. And he stumbled backward. He didn't fall down. And when I heard the guys on the bleachers go, "Oh," like really what they were saying was, "Oh shit," right?
It's getting real.
And again, let me remind you, I don't know who I'm sparring.
Right.
This dude came back at me and destroyed my world. Okay. He came at me with the full force, all the guns out. He barraged me with a series of strikes. He threw me on the ground and he ground and pounded my face. I was wearing a helmet, but by the time he was done, my helmet had spun backwards and my shin pads were falling off.
Wow.
And I remember to this day that to this day, I still haven't been punched by somebody, thank God, who I thought that their hands felt like cinder blocks. Okay.
Oh.
So the bell rings. I survived the round. I'm not knocked out, but I'm definitely messed up. Ego's deflated. I come off the mat there and I go to the bleachers and, my day is over. And I remember, a couple of the kids that were there, they kind of like chuckled and said something funny about what had happened. And they were like, "Oh man," they're like, "That was a really good kick, but you're lucky, you're lucky that you survived." So I go home and I get on the machine, the Google machine, and I go to and just want to give you some more context to the viewers.
Yeah.
Google was not like then 20 years ago, like it was today. So you don't just go to Google and like type something in. You had to go to the website, the actual American Top Team website, and then go click on the little tab that says fighters. And then under the tab, you go to professional fighters. Then you go through the list of people, right? So I'm going through the list of people and I'm trying to find an image of the guys who I saw today. And I'm going down the images and I'm looking at the smaller guys and I identify my sparring partners. The first guy I already told you was Edson Deniz. The second guy, the guy who mauled me, was Hermes Franca. And if anybody remembers Hermes Franca, he had fought in the UFC multiple times. And he was known for being a really savage jiu-jitsu guy, black belt, of course. And he also was known for throwing these wild looping overhand rights, and he would just crumble people with them. And when they crumble, he would, shoot his takedown, get him on the ground, and tap him out.
Oh, wow.
So So I'm sitting there in my chair at 21 years old, and I'm feeling kind of funny because I part of me was humbled because I just got my butt kicked, and the other part of me was feeling kind of good though because I'm like, wow, these are like top dudes from Brazil,
Right.
and I'm like, I'm on the right track here. I'm on the right track. So I continued training with American Top Team for about another year. And 21 years old, living in South Florida, I quickly made bad decisions and I got caught up in the nightclub and nightlife lifestyle.
Oh.
A lot of people down here, they come down here, especially when they're 21 years old. They're young, they're impressionable, they're stupid, and they make bad decisions. And that's what I did. So I was never, never like a drug addict or an alcoholic or any of that stuff. But I definitely drank a lot. I chased women a lot. And I hung out in the party scene. And I remember saying whenever I ran into the guys from the club, they would say, hey, my nickname is Bambino. The Brazilians call me Bambino, which means kind of like because I look very young. When I was young, I looked young, and now that I'm older, I still look young. so they call me Bambino, which kind of means like baby face or baby.
Okay.
So they say, Bambino, how come we don't see you around anymore? And I would respond by saying, hey man, I'd rather just be on the beach drinking a margarita than at the gym, putting in the hard work. And then that was the beginning of what I thought was the end for me. I had let it go, completely stopped training for about 1 year. Okay. I forget what happened, but somebody had called me and they were like, yo, man, Florida Open Jiu-Jitsu grappling tournament. Do you want to enter? And I was like, why? And I'm cocky and I'm stupid. I'm like, why? So I can go in there and so I can clean up. And he was like, man, you won't clean up. I'm like, you don't think I will? I will. So my out of shape, nightclub rave self decided to enter the Florida Open in, I think, 2006.
Okay.
And I entered the Florida Open. It was a no-gi tournament. I don't remember exactly how the brackets went. But what I do remember is the most important part of this segment of the story. When I got to the finals, and this is crazy, by the way, I'm about to tell you. When I got to the finals of that tournament at the Florida Open, I, once again, had no idea who my opponent was. My coach, at the time, he wasn't my coach. He was a friend of mine. And at the time, he was a blue belt, like how I was, still a blue belt. Today, that person who I'm talking about, who coached me in my corner today, he's a black belt. He said to me, holy crap, Joe, do you know who that is? And I'm like, no. And quite frankly, I didn't care. I didn't care. He's like, dude, that's George Masvidal. You need to be really careful because he likes to do leg locks and heel hooks.
Wow.
So
Masvidal.
Now back then, and you guys, and people can look it up, back then, Masvidal was only 145 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
Or 150, 145, 155, somewhere in there, right? In 06. He grew. He's big. He's way bigger now, right? And I didn't care who it was. So me and Masvidal went, and forgive me, I don't remember all the rules of this particular tournament, but we went like all 2 or all 3 periods or however they broke up the time clock, I forget. But we went the full distance, going back and forth in a heated battle that ended up end of regulation time 0-0, no score, and the entire gymnasium. It was in a high school gymnasium somewhere down in Miami. Was surrounding our mat, watching our match. Everybody knows who George is. Everyone, because he's the kid from Miami.
Yep.
And at the time, he was the up and coming MMA fighter from FFA, which is Freestyle Fighting Academy in Miami. And, half of he had like 100 people there from his club. Right. And I'm there and I have one person in my corner. because once again, not only am I a year out from not training because I just decided that I wanted to quit and I was just there to compete that day to show people what I had. But here I am in the finals against what would be the Jorge Masvidal today, as you guys all know it.
Right.
So we get to, back then, under this particular tournament rule set, they had an overtime. And so we go to overtime 0-0. And forgive me, I don't remember how the rules were supposed to go. I think it might have been like first takedown wins or, first near submission wins or something like that. Anyways, long and short of it, we end up in a scramble and he ends up leg locking me and I had to tap. So I tapped. And I lost to George Masvidal in 2006 in a Miami Jiu-Jitsu Grappling Open. This next part, I'm wondering if I should leave out or not, because if I ever run into George, I live in Coconut Creek and I know he trains in Coconut Creek. I don't want him to slap me.
I mean, it'd be pretty surprising if he hears his podcast and his name pops up. So yeah, go ahead and tell it.
All right, George, listen, if you end up listening to this podcast, nothing but love, man, nothing but love. All right. So listen, so the tournament, so the match is over. I lost, he wins fair and square. I come off the mat and I'm standing in the line, the concession line, to buy like a Gatorade or something like that. Mm-hmm. And he walks over to me, right? And remember now, 2006. So how old are we? I don't know. I think we're like 25 years old, both of us, right? And I think he's younger than me. So he's probably like 23. And he walks over to me and he goes, "Hey, man." He's like, he's very polite. He goes, "Hey, man." He's like, "Where are you from?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm from Boca, blah, blah, blah." And he's like, "Oh," he's like, "Where you train?" And I'm so arrogant that I'm like, "Man, I don't even train, dude. I don't train anywhere. I used to train a top team, but like I haven't trained in years, man." And he was like, "Oh, okay." He's like, "Cool." He's like, "Do you fight? Are you gonna fight?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I used to fight MMA. I'm thinking about maybe coming back, maybe not." He's like, "Oh, what weight you at? What weight you at?" And I'm like, 145. I think they called it flyweight at the time. Mm-hmm. And he was it was funny because he was kind of feeling me out. You know what I mean? He wanted to kind of like inquire about, who is this tough kid that I just had to scrap with? And right. Am I going to see him again? Maybe in a local fight. Right. Mm-hmm. Cause back then he was fighting in the local gigs and what have you. So he might not even remember that after all the success he's had and all the money he's made. But I remember that. And there's an old saying amongst combat athletes, we don't always remember all of the wins we have, especially if we've had a lot of them. But one thing that combat athletes do remember is their painful losses, because they're memorable, because they're usually ones that cause, the most pain and the ones that you dwell on and replay in your head over and over again.
Right.
So I remember almost every loss that I've had, right? Because you replay, you recalculate, you think what you woulda, coulda, shoulda, and how you're not going to do that and how you're going to fix it. Mm-hmm. So that was 2006. And from 2006 all the way up to 2021 is what I meant to say. 2021. Mm-hmm. This time last year, I did no jiu-jitsu, no MMA. I became a husband. First I became a Christian. God saved me.
Nice.
And when that happened, everything changed. Right. And so no more, nightclubs and staying out late and womanizing and all these things. So met my wife, got married, became a father, businessman, straight and narrow, got fat and became lazy. And did that all the way for the next, I don't know if my math is correct. I did that for about 15 years. About 15. Man. Just hung it up. I had no desire to go back. I felt like it was something, jiu-jitsu and fighting in general. I felt like it was something that was so far behind me. I felt like it's something that you do kind of like when you're a kid, because that's what kids do, because you have time. And, as an adult, you really don't have that kind of time anymore.
Yeah.
And not only that, but bro, for the first time ever, I'll say this to the public. Some of my friends, very few, like maybe 5, if that, some of them stuck with it. And when I saw them getting promoted, years later, 5-6 years later, getting their black belts, I just got discouraged, and I thought to myself, man, like, me and him were blue belts together. Now he's a black belt. I'm just never going to get that. Forget it. Whatever. So I just said, you know what? This is not for me anymore. We're done. I hung it up. Which brings me to the back end leading up into the present moment of my jiu-jitsu story. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So about a year ago, and I'll tell you exactly when it was, because I have a counter on my phone, a special counter, a clock that counts how many days that I've been doing jiu-jitsu without fail. And I'm not talking about taking a day off. I mean, like consistently training jiu-jitsu. Everybody takes days off.
Mm-hmm.
It's been 442 days, so over a year.
Right. Oh, okay.
Okay. So I've been training now over a year. So what's that? Like a year and about 100 days, something like that. So about a year and a half ago, on my 39th birthday, I went to the doctor's office, and the doctor came back and he checked my blood pressure, and he says, whoa, he says, that's all jacked up. And then, he checked my weight. My weight was all jacked up. And then he told me that if I didn't modify some of my life choices and diet and things like that, that the conversation that we were going to have this time next year was going to be a lot different. And then he pretty much read me a long list of things that could happen. I'm not a medical person, so I don't remember all the terms, but the high blood pressure, the hypertension, the diabetes, and all these things, right?
Right.
So I remember thinking to myself, what the hell? Shoot. I mean, you've been listening to me talk now for a couple of minutes, but it feels like only yesterday that I was that top athlete.
Mm-hmm.
Now the doctor's reading me the riot act. What happened to Joe McFarlane?
Right.
The tough, fast guy that can bang with black belts in an open division. What happened? And so I went home realizing that, a change probably had to happen. And, I remember right around that time too, we went on vacation and I was at the beach with my youngest daughter, and my wife snapped a photo of me playing with her in the sand. And in that photo, I can see my gut hanging over my, my bathing suit.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you don't realize it, but like someone takes a photo and you look at the photo and you look at yourself and you're like, wow, like I'm like my body's changed.
Like I'm a whale.
Right. Like, and I just remember looking between what the doctor said and looking at the photo and like my arms were skinny and my chest was skinny, my belly was getting fat and just getting out of shape. Right. And I realized that the way my body looked, I was becoming like what I always thought that I would look like.
Mm-hmm.
Because I always thought that I had stock in the athleticism game, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was barbecuing at my house one day. My daughter had a water gun. She sprayed some water on the tile floor. I didn't see it. I was going fast. I slipped on the tile floor and blew out my knee.
Oh no.
And the knee injury was the final straw. I remember thinking to myself, like, wow, I'm not even 40 and I have bad knee, won't be able to walk right. I'm getting old man injuries, all this negativity.
Right.
So I made a decision. I said, you know what? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to rehab this knee and I'm going to go back to exercising for the purpose of not being decrepit physically, so I can play with my daughter, who is now 5 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could have, God willing, a longer life.
Yes.
Because the doctor's telling me, hey man, your blood pressure's jacked, hypertension's jacked, and blah, blah, blah. I sell real estate in South Florida. It's a very stressful job. Plus, I'm an extremely hard worker. I'm a workaholic. So, and not only that, but in my life now at 40 years old, I've been around long enough to see some of my friends pass away, which is very sad. Things that are outside of our control, different reasons for passing. Everyone has, some of these people had different things happen, but I've been around now long enough to see some people pass away from, like a heart attack and things like that. Right.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking to myself, like, man, this is going to be me if I don't make some changes.
Yeah.
So I sat there in my office with a yellow pad and paper, and I wrote down on the yellow pad and paper inevitably what I knew was going to be true. I just had to write it out in front of me just so I can see it with my own eyes.
Right.
But I already knew what was going to happen, but I wrote it down. And I wrote down this. I wrote down, Joe, I said to myself, Joe, what are you going to do that's going to help you drastically change your life for the better physically, that you're actually going to enjoy doing, so much so that you become almost addicted to it, and that you got to keep coming back. And if you don't keep coming back, you're going to be upset if you don't keep coming back. Whatever it is that you do needs to be something that's not a daunting task. Because I think everybody has gone to the gym and been like, okay, this is cool for a couple of weeks, and eventually they quit.
Right.
Same thing goes for a diet. Same thing goes for whatever, right? What's it going to be? And I'm going off the top of the dome right now. I'm trying to remember just from memory. And I remember these categories, and I'm just going to say them as I remember them. Say, whatever it is that I do needs to be fun. Category number 1, fun. Okay. Whatever it is that I'm going to do is going to need to have some type of level of badassery. Okay. Badassery. I can't just go to box aerobics. That's where all the single moms go to get in shape, right? I need to go somewhere where I walk in, I feel like I'm a badass and the people around me are badass. Okay. And it's got to be fun. That's 2 things. The third thing is that wherever I go, it needs to be competitive, because I'm naturally a competitor. I'm the type of guy who will try to do more push-ups than you. I'm the type of guy that will try to read more books than you. I'm the type of guy that will try to, whatever it is,
right.
Competitive. So competition drives me. Number 4, whatever it is that I'm doing, that I'm investing time into, I'm an entrepreneur, so time for me is like extremely valuable.
Yes.
Well, whatever it is that I'm investing in needs to fall into my time schedule, right? So if it's a gym that has class only at this one time throughout the day and I can't be there because my schedule won't allow it, that's out the door. Done.
Right.
And then finally, the last category number 5, is whatever it is that I'm going to do needs to be practical. And what I mean by that is that you can use it not just in the gym, but you can actually use it outside of the gym if you had to. An example of practicality, I'm just thinking of it, would be like, learning how to swim, right? Or competing in like swim races, right? Where you enjoy the thrill of the competition, and you're swimming and you're getting in shape and you're working out, but God forbid, if you're ever in a situation where you had to swim for your life, there's the practicality of actually learning how to swim.
Right.
So those are my 5 categories: practicality, time, fun, badassery, competitive edge. And after I wrote those 5 things down on a yellow pad, it came down to 2 options, 3 options, 4 options: wrestling, jiu-jitsu, boxing, and Muay Thai. Excuse me. I just coughed here. So I'm sitting there and I'm laughing to myself, and I'm like, well, Joe, you're 40 or 39. I was 39. You're not gonna get punched in the head anymore.
Yeah, that's out of the question.
So I thought to myself, maybe you can do what they call cardio box, or where you get fit but don't get hit.
Yeah.
Problem with that is there's no badassery. You're going to go in there and the coach is going to be like, hit the bag. Oh, but don't hit my face. To me, that didn't check the badassery box.
Right.
So immediately I knew that cardio boxing was not it. And regular boxing certainly was not it because I didn't want to get hit anymore in the head. So that eliminates those two. So now we're left with wrestling. If you remember, I'm a wrestler at core. Love the sport. Love it. And jiu-jitsu. Well, the wrestling ship has sailed, my friend. Right? Right. In case you don't realize, it's very unlikely to see wrestlers north of 35. Usually by the time they're in their early 30s, they're coaches anyway.
Right.
And or Olympians, but for the most part, they're coaches anyway. And to compete in wrestling, at a competitive level, it's very hard impact, hard paced. And I believe that ship had sailed in my life. Plus, wrestling is a collegiate sport. I'm not in college.
Yeah.
Not in college. So that ship was sailed, which inevitably led to what I knew before I even started writing the list down. But I had to write the list just so I can see it on paper. And I recommend that the listeners, if you guys are thinking about starting, or if you're thinking about starting back up, consider the 5 categories I just told you about, and just know that you've already arrived to this conclusion. But listening to this podcast is the confirmation that it's time for you to go back.
Definitely.
So lucky for me, I don't live in the boondocks. I live in Coconut Creek, Florida, which is home to one of the biggest, baddest MMA and jiu-jitsu fight clubs in the world, American Top Team. And right around that time, unfortunately, COVID was happening. So I want to sign up. I finally muster up the balls to go and do it. And you can't because everything shut down because of COVID.
Yeah.
Well, that sucks, doesn't it? Not only that, but the main headquarters where all of these famous fighters train eventually got closed off from the public and was reserved for only the professional fighters. So that kind of, at the time, I didn't know any better, but at the time it kind of deflated my ambition. I'm like, oh shoot, I was really anxious to go back to go and train at the location of where the big leaguers are. Even though I was no longer a big leaguer. I just wanted to kind of be around it because of the badassery. Well, fortunately, in the wake of COVID, what happened is some of the head coaches kind of broke off and started their own little satellite locations.
Mm-hmm.
And down the street from Coconut Creek was Coral Springs, American Top Team location. Went in, signed up, told my now coach, who's the owner of that school, Coach Bruno, the entire story that I just told you right now. And he was like, okay, cool. I'll see you, tomorrow. Great. So I show up for my first class in 15 years. And while we're doing the stretching exercise, I'm panting very heavily because I'm so out of shape. I barely made it through the warm-up. And during the warm-ups, we do like break falls. You know what a break fall is, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah. So I realize that you do this. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
The people listening, break falls is when you practice. It's like a backwards roll, and what you're doing is you're just practicing falling down. You're practicing falling on your butt.
Yeah.
And I hadn't done a break fall in 15 years, so when I did a break fall, I landed right on my tailbone and bruised my tailbone.
Ah.
And I hurt so I'm sitting there holding my ass, and I'm going, I hurt my ass, and he's kind of chuckling. And he's such a sweetheart. He wasn't laughing at me. He was kind of just, I think he was just kind of doing that, like trying to make me feel better about, being new. But I didn't come back the second or third or fourth day because my butt bone hurt so bad.
Ooh.
And my coach thought that I quit. He thought that I quit. He thought I was one of those guys that came into the gym and talked about how I was this badass who fought Jorge Masvidal.
And then disappear.
then I quit the first day because I hurt my butt. So the honest truth is I really did hurt my butt and and it was bad. And I was just so out of shape that my tailbone had not seen anything but a computer chair for 15 years.
Oh man.
So, so once I got around that, I started training 3 days a week. Got through the initial shock of soreness, got through the initial shock of arthritis and tendonitis, which is something that you don't get in your 20s, that you do get in your late 30s. So for the first time in my life, I felt my forearms and biceps like they were on fire.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a combination of me being out of shape and me being older and me gripping and fighting too hard when you know you don't have to do that.
Yeah.
And over the course of the next 6 months or so, I like how when I was 20, I picked it up real fast. Muscle memory kicked in, and I was allowed to be able to compete in the men's blue belt master divisions at Jiu-Jitsu World League and IBJJF tournaments.
Nice.
I won Miami Open, Orlando Open, Pan American Games champion, and I competed at IBJJF World Championships Blue Master in Vegas I think it was 2 months ago. And unfortunately, I did not place in that tournament. I ended up losing to the guy who took second place.
I mean,
So
that's definitely a high level of badassery, man.
I'm back, baby.
You're back. You're back like
back.
you never left.
And so in closing to my story, even though the story is not over, we're just getting started, right?
Oh yeah, we're just getting started.
But in the arrival to our current destination, current event, I've lost, I believe, 25 or 30 pounds.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I've lost 30 pounds. Most of it came from off of my waist.
Mm-hmm.
Six pack is back. Chest and shoulders look good. Best shape of my life. Plus, you get a couple of bonus points for being 40 because people when you're 21 and you're a competitive athlete, you're supposed to be in shape.
Yeah, you're supposed to be.
You're supposed to be lean and mean and ripped and everything, right? So at 40, when you're looking, lean and mean and ripped, you get bonus points, right? So I got those bonus kudos points. And now I'm headed towards IBJJF Master Blue No-Gi World Championships in 3 weeks.
Wow.
I have a shot to win. I intend to. I'm in a training camp right now. Training camp is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Well, I'm sorry. Then I'll back that up. Training camp is Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 5 days a week. Sometimes I drop it down to 4 if my body needs it.
Well, just a little bit.
Yeah. I definitely take 2 days off for recovery, but when I'm in an intense training camp for a tournament like this one, I again at 40, sometimes I keep it high throttle at 5. Sometimes I'll drop it down to 4. But what's really important is this. In my training camp, there are 5 other people who I'm sparring with every day, 3 of which are returning world champions. All 3 of them, 3 of which are returning world champions. 2 of them are purple belts. 1 of them is a black belt. And then my other 2 sparring partners, one of them is a Division I wrestler, and the other one is they're a professional fighter. They're a professional MMA fighter. I don't know what their jiu-jitsu record is. So this is a special training camp that I'm in. It's a focus group. I have tremendous respect for these people. I am the low guy on the belt rank system in this group, and I'm also the old guy in this group. So they don't have to train with me. Although I do think I bring a good set of rolling skill to the group, but they have brought me in and they have pushed me through some of the hardest training sessions that I've had, and also training sessions that I never thought that I'd even be doing at 40 when I think back to where I was just a year ago.
And that's amazing, man. That's amazing to be, out of a sport for so long, 15 years. Like at that point, you basically forgot about it, and to be able to just come back and you back stronger and better than ever, man. That's amazing.
Thank you for that affirmation. I really appreciate it. And look, man, I could not have done it. I have so many thank yous to give out. First, thank Jesus Christ. Without him, I wouldn't be here, period.
Absolutely.
Alive. I wouldn't even be alive, number one. Number two, thanks to my wife and family who without them, I wouldn't even be able to afford the time to get away to go and hit the gym. So they make that happen. Number three, amazing coaches and workout partners who have been sharpening me and encouraging me and correcting me. As a matter of fact, right 2 seconds ago, I just got a text message from my coach, jiu-jitsu coach. He says, "Okay, cool. I'll see you tomorrow." And he flexes his arm muscle. "I'll see you tomorrow." He's, my coach. I'm on the East Coast. It's almost 11 o'clock at night, and my jiu-jitsu coach, who's a multiple-time black belt world champion at IBJJF, and he's also a retired UFC fighter. He's one of my coaches. He's texting me at 10:30 at night, telling me that he'll see me tomorrow.
Nice.
So I have a tremendous support group, and I'll close my story like this. My goal is to win IBJJF Worlds in 3 weeks. And my goal is to win the IBJJF World Tournament at the master level every year for the next several years. And I don't know how fast I can get to black. I don't know. That's pretty much up to my coach.
Mm-hmm.
But I would like to win Master Black within 5 to 10 years from where I'm at right now, which means at 40 years old, I'd like to complete that goal before I turn 50.
Man, and the route that you're going, man, I don't see no issues of that happening, man.
Lord willing.
Definitely, Lord willing, and I'm a man of affirmation, so I definitely claim it that it's going to happen, man. And I can't wait to talk to you down the line to hear about all the success that you are on this road of success that you're on now, man. That's awesome.
Thank you again for that affirmation. I really appreciate it. I mentioned that I wanted to custom tailor this story and summarize it, but there are so many weird, interesting twists and turns and names that I'd come across over a 20-year spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to leave anything out because I do think it's kind of a quirky, interesting adventure that I've had in jiu-jitsu. And man, we could do another podcast where I just talk about, you just heard my story.
Yeah.
But we can just block another podcast where I can talk to you just about the basic benefits of what jiu-jitsu is given to me in my life as a 40-year-old businessman.
Oh, we would definitely sit down again and and definitely talk about that, because it definitely sounds like we only touched the tip of the iceberg of your amazing jiu-jitsu story. So yeah, we'll definitely have to carve out some more time and get that story out there.
Absolutely. So what do you think? Do you think that I'm going to get in trouble with Jorge Masvidal when I see him at the local Publix supermarket?
So this is what I'm thinking. Now, if he